isn't homosexual!
Well, howdy. It's been a while. Last time you saw me, I was posting silly comedy skits as a freshman in college. Time has passed. I'm back home, still in college, still in debt. But I feel now it's time to get back to my roots. I've been doing a little gaming, going through some of the games I couldn't play, either because I no longer owned a PS4, or because my 8-year-old PC couldn't handle them. One of those games is the subject of today's video, Red Dead Redemption. More specifically, both Red Dead 1 and 2. Today I want to try and explain how I think that regardless of the order you play these games, you get a satisfying, damn near perfect narrative cycle. Multiple disclaimers. Firstly, major spoilers for the stories of Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2. So if you feel like you want to experience those games for yourself, get out! Secondly, I played Red Dead 2 first. So there's going to be some inherent bias, as that's what really moved me and made me want to play the first game in the first place. Bars! First, I'll give my thoughts about each game. Then I'll talk about their connections, bring up some criticisms, and make my closing arguments. Let's start with Red Dead Redemption 2. Alright, enough of that shitty Arthur Morgan impression. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game that I always wanted to play, but at the time it came out, I would have just recently sold my PS4, and my mind was in other places. I don't think my 16-year-old silly brain would have appreciated the narrative significance the game brings to the table. But after recently obtaining a shiny PS5, I figured now is the time to give a game a chance after coming off the cusp of two fantastic open worlds, that being Cyberpunk 2077 and Ghost of Tsushima. I wondered if the Rockstar style of open world would hold up, especially 6 years after release. And while Rockstar's design language does have problems and definitely make themselves known, overall it didn't hinder the experience, and that experience is something I've quite never experienced in a video game before. If one phrase could explain RDR2's biggest strength, it would be narrative detail. The amount of dialogue, random interactions in camp between the gang, and the great use of foreshadowing elements that one can only appreciate on repeated playthroughs just shows the dedication Rockstar writers had in giving us a definitive Western experience in a video game. What's so great is that none of this is forced upon you. These character building elements, many of them are optional. These conversations will just happen while you're at camp, and your chance of listening in will depend on how often you choose to spend time at camp. Seeing the progression of Dutch, of someone who seems to genuinely care about the people in his gang, transforming into a reckless, trigger-happy egomaniac, is really sad, especially how he's directly leading many of the gang members' downfall.
What now?
We're back, and I'm sitting here, and I am contemplating the great journey of the sun, and considering a famous chess move.
Oh, no!
The world is so dynamic. Every time a random event happens, it really feels random. There's no warning or indicator on the map where these things will happen, they just do, catching you off guard, and your attention is fully focused on what's happening. When you're cautious or too slow to realize the full extent of what's going on and it causes someone to die, you feel guilty thinking you could have saved that individual. Of course, that depends on how you choose to play the character of Arthur Morgan. The honor system, while nowhere near as in-depth of a decision maker as something like a CD Projekt Red game, is still noticeable enough to make you see the consequences of your actions, especially if you choose to go the opposite end of the spectrum of your first playthrough. Speaking of Arthur Morgan, god damn!
I got some jelly beans. You like jelly beans?
What a character. Getting to see this man from being a typical conniving outlaw, then getting to learn more slowly about his tragic past, and when things can't seem to get worse for the gang, boom, he's got a terminal illness.
It's making me cringe, Dutch!
Arthur's tuberculosis diagnosis is something I never would have saw coming, and watching a playthrough, seeing the moment he contracted it, is just incredible to me. Something that seemed so insignificant at the time was the entire catalyst of Arthur's change of character, if you choose to go the high honor route. We'll talk more about the high versus low honor story and some people's issues with them overall, but I'd have to say RDR2 is my personal favorite story I've ever experienced in a video game. While it has its issues and still has that classic Rockstar do the mission as we intended you to mentality, it's a game I think everyone should try once in their lifetime. It won't be for everyone, but if you're a fan of open world adventure games, I cannot recommend it enough. I'd love to talk more about it, but with this video, it would have been 2 hours long. And who knows, maybe one day I'll do an in-depth video discussing RDR2 as a whole. But for now, let's switch gears and continue the story with the original Red Dead Redemption. The game that started it all. If you don't count Red Dead Revolver, but we don't have to talk about that. Red Dead Redemption's a damn fine game. A very good one, I'd go as far to say. And I imagine the quality would have truly shined in 2011, especially after coming off the cusp of Grand Theft Auto 4. So let me preface something. Everything about this game tying into my perfect cycle argument is truly on a narrative level. While I can totally understand why someone might prefer this game to the second one, it's hard to deny that this game has definitely aged, not just from open world standards, but even Rockstar standards. The mechanics are a little clunky, the story, while being great, especially if you play the second one, is much more tight and to the point, which some might prefer, and I don't dislike it, but it comes down to the fact that RDR2 tries to do more narratively. Whether it succeeds at that is up to you. But I think it does, and while it might seem like I'm building up to a point about how the story disappoints, that couldn't be further from the truth. RDR's story is clean cut. It has a story to tell about a man who has to fight his past demons to hopefully save his future, for himself and for his family, and it's truly a cinematic experience from start to finish. John Marston's stories in both games is pure tragedy. An orphaned boy falling into a gang, only to be betrayed by the man he looked up to as his father, seeing his fellow brothers and sisters fall to that man's reckless behavior. After finally putting down the man who sparked that downfall and had a chance at peace, he once again is pulled back into being the person he doesn't want to be. And what's his reward? Execution. Now that's powerful storytelling. To summarize, while it shows its age and wears it on its sleeve, Red Dead Redemption is still a very solid open world game, and definitely worth a playthrough if you want to play the series in order, or if you played RDR2 and want to see John's conclusion. Fuck Jack, though.
You sure know how to make a boy feel like a man.
I'm not used to these here city folk. What the hell even is this? This is ridiculous.
That beaver incident, man, I'll tell you what, that was a big problem.
They
back
never
then.
found little Jimmy.
No, they never found
Howdy,
little Jimmy.
partners.
What do you want, mister?
How are you?
Y'all got kind faces.
Thank you, mister.
So do
For
you.
a couple losers.
What'd you say?
So what do I mean by saying these games have a cyclic nature to them? Well, ultimately it comes down to the fact that I think regardless of which order you play these games, you will get more out of the second game you played, depending on the first one you played. If you played RDR1 first, you get a tight narrative with room for expansion. You feel as if you're playing a man with history, and RDR2 fills in the context, and while primarily being the story of Arthur Morgan, the epilogue helps set up Red Dead 1, and we see how John got to where he was before the government called on him to take out his former brothers. It creates a great retrospective feeling when you're playing Red Dead 2, seeing all that Arthur fought for and how ultimately it ends for the gang, and it just makes you feel even more bad for old Arthur. And John too, with his fate in RDR1 being even more tragic, but almost more badass if you will, even though you could argue it's not very badass to get shot to pieces by the government unless you're so Sigma. Terrible joke. If you played RDR2, it's almost a similar satisfaction in reverse. Since in this example you're playing the games in chronological order, you get to experience this downfall from beginning to end, almost like a TV drama. Instead of reflecting on John's fate, you're experiencing it, making those emotions more raw. But raw isn't superior to the retrospective feeling, it's just different. And all this is to say is that it almost feels like a cycle, and where you start in the cycle depends on what game you played first, and I think for a video game that's just really cool and unique. You get to see the gang right at the end of its heyday, see the demise of not only the gang, but Dutch himself. making you reflect about what John was thinking about when he had to hunt down his brothers in Red Dead 1. Seeing all that Arthur did for John, especially if you choose to help John escape, but to be fair, your honor kind of affects this narrative, but let's just go with the high honor for now. I'll be talking about the honor system soon. And seeing where it all goes when playing 2 into 1 adds to the overall tragedy of the two games' stories. I understand I might have repeated myself on some points, but I feel in this instance that actually assists my cycle argument, but I apologize for coming off redundant. You might be thinking, but Mike, wouldn't all games that have multiple entries with an overarching storyline have a similar effect? I would say kind of, but not really. Let me explain. It is true that RDR is not the first game series to have the next game in the franchise be a prequel to it. Some things that come to mind are Halo Reach and Skyward Sword, even though technically those games didn't follow up the original. The thing that sets RDR apart is that these are the only 2 games in that series, and there's no other games between them to complicate the story. I don't mean to say complicate in a negative context, I'm just trying to illustrate that RDR's narratives are very tight as a result of only 2 entries. With Halo Reach and Skyward Sword, there are many games in between them and the first game in the series, adding a much more diverse narrative, and many more different games to be someone's first or second. And speaking purely in release dates in narrative, you don't get more out of Skyward Sword by playing Zelda NES, or vice versa. And you do get more out of Halo CE by playing Reach, since there's also Halos 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the War series, I guess. There's many other narrative outlets that I think doesn't create the same cycle system that RDR 1 and 2 stories provide. Now I think it's time to talk about the biggest factor that affects my arguments of the RDR games having a tight cycle, and that is the honor system. Oh, the honor system. A meter that rates how moral or honorable you are and has in-game consequences. I think I'm going to start off by talking about RDR 1's honor system, as it's a bit more simplistic and gameplay focused, with RDR 2's honor system having actual story consequences, most notably the ending, but we'll get there. As stated, the honor system rates how moral your character is, and it's based on certain actions you do in-game. Murder civilians and lawmen, and choose the more sinister options inside side missions, you're less honorable. The general public will fear you and be less likely to report you to the police, and you'll get discounts from thieves in Thieves Landing. Keep bounties alive, do the more morally conscious options in side quests, and assist the law in random events, you're more honorable. Shops will offer you discounts, people will react more positively to you, I think you get it. In RDR 1, there really aren't many story factors that tie into your honor, aside from how quest givers will react to your choices in side missions. One of those who is most notable is the Strange Man series of side quests, but we don't have time to get into that whole can of worms. It's an alright mechanic, but as I've stated, it's not impactful to the story that much, and is more for the player to decide how they want to play John Marston. Contrast this with RDR 2, where your honor has quite of an impact in the story. It is similar to RDR 1 in terms of game mechanics, but where it differs is the story. There are minor but different dialogue moments characters will have with Arthur depending on your honor. Sometimes you'll interact with different characters depending on your honor, and even an entire quest line that is only available to high honor Arthur. And I'd argue it's a pretty important quest line too, narratively speaking. This is where some of the conflicting opinions come in regarding RDR 2 and its honor system. I think most people would agree that saying the high honor story is a fantastic one in its own context, but it also kind of strips the player of true choices. When you have one path of a story be dramatically more complete and fleshed out than the other one, the player sort of feels inclined to go with that route, making you question why even have another route in the first place. It feels like Arthur Morgan's story is the high honor route, and is truly about redemption. The low honor route is more just like a bad guy who knows he's bad and is more conscious about it than his colleagues, but doesn't really make any concerted effort to change, so his ending where he dies more brutally at the hands of Michael's revolver doesn't really offer any satisfaction, especially compared to the emotional, ball-crushing ending of the high honor route. The game feels like it's pushing you to be more honorable, Like, how can you expect the player to think the low honor route is just as viable when Arthur is talking in cutscenes about saving the women and children and still giving you the option to help Marston escape or help Sadie avenge her husband? One could argue, in this context, while Arthur is not honorable, it's just in his character to be loyal to his gang. And I do agree with that, to an extent. It still feels like you can't truly experience the story as a full unhonorable bastard. And if they were going to put in this effort for different dialogue and cutscene outcomes, it feels like a half measure, not to undermine the effort of the development team and the voice actors who all did something truly outstanding. It just feels like they should have went more into the low honor route, instead of just giving us these minor differences that don't really ultimately affect anything, and kind of creates a more subpar ending. If they went into put in both effort, we could have had a multiple ending outcomes on some CD Projekt Red thing, and really felt like we had a full choice, instead of having one option being kind of subpar and having the other option be so good to the point where you ask yourself, why would I even pick the other option? Which, in this context, when a game gives you multiple options but you only feel like you should go with one, you're basically missing out on a whole other side of things, which not only creates a negative reception around that other option, but kind of makes it feel like the developers wasted their time doing this extra stuff when no one even realistically is going to do it, because it just doesn't fit the same narrative conclusions and satisfaction that the high honor route does. Let me know what you guys think about that. And that's really all I have to say. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree with me in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you enjoyed. Leave a like, and share with someone if they're into video games and or Red Dead Redemption. This is definitely the most effort I've put into a YouTube video, and I want to strive to match this level of quality and succeed it. I don't know what my next video will be about. It could be a game, a general topic, some type of vlog, comedy skit, who knows? All I know is that I'm back on my YouTube shit and ready for what's ever in store.
Well, folks, that's all the time I have left. I had to go on the run because those two...
Winkle! Get your ass out here, boy! Get over here!
You sure this is how you want to do this?
You interrupted our beaver talk, boy. You're done for.
What he said. All right, then. Damn fools.
Cruel, cruel world, must I go on? Cruel, cruel world, I'm moving on. I've been living too fast, I've been living too wrong. Cruel, cruel world, I'm gone. This big old world sure got me running round. Heard a voice, it told me settle down. With the moonlight as my guide,